Ignorance is destroying Japan. Chapter 4, Sanction Simulation. Japan becomes a target of sanctions. A 25% tariff is imposed.
Fentanyl 25% tariff. Japan's government response. If you're concerned, now is the time to subscribe and like this video.
Now that the United States has once again welcomed President Trump, what Japan is facing is real sanctions. Fentanyl, trade deficits, and national security, all of them are bargaining chips and tools of pressure. Sanctions are no longer hypothetical. What Japan needs now is to face reality and take action. A large number of cases have been confirmed in which fentanyl precursors from China are exported to third countries via Japan. There have been reports that Japan was the starting point for fentanyl precursors that ended up in countries like Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Mexico. Main verified sources and evidence as of now. Mentions by the US DEA and international NGOs. Via unofficial channels or media reports. Key points from US government reports and testimonies. In 2023 hearing materials for the US Congress and related DEA reports. Japan was repeatedly mentioned as a transit country with lax customs and inspection procedures. Japan has been flagged as a country where chemicals and precursor materials from China can pass through easily, with a structure that makes it difficult to track their re-export via countries like Laos and Myanmar. International media reports, 2023 to 2024. Feature articles from US newspapers such as the Washington Post and the New York Times, as well as Japan's Nike, have highlighted the possibility that Japan is functioning as a logistics transit point for chemical precursors. In particular, experts in economic security have raised alarms about suspicious export statistics of pharmaceutical ingredients from Japan to Southeast Asia. Domestic Japanese reports, indirect, Nike, Kyodo News, etc. In the December 2024 morning edition of Nike, it was reported that compounds believed to be fentanyl precursors from China may have passed through Japan and been sent onto third countries. However, the Japanese government has neither officially confirmed nor denied these reports, stating that the matter is still under investigation. Statements from former customs officials and narcotics control personnel, media reports, and commentary. According to comments from a former senior official of Yokohama Customs, there is evidence that pharmaceutical shipments bound for Southeast Asia were relabeled while transiting through Japan. As supporting evidence, export customs data was cited showing that Chinese origin materials, whose product names and stated users did not match, were being transshipped through Japan. There are credible reports and testimonies, cited by the US Congress, DEA, and major media, indicating that fentanyl precursors from China are being routed through Japan to Southeast Asia and Mexico. Official recognition by the Japanese government. Unconfirmed, neither denied nor acknowledged, i.e., official silence. Reports from the US Congress and the DEA have warned that Japan may be serving as a transit point for fentanyl precursors originating from China. Some reports suggest that traces of such activity can be seen in pharmaceutical shipments from Japan to third countries, particularly Laos, Thailand, and Myanmar. However, the Japanese government has not officially acknowledged the issue. Japanese government response. The Japanese government has not announced any countermeasures regarding this issue. The Ministry of Finance, which proudly reports zero fentanyl seizures, may in fact be neglecting border control efforts and possibly turning a blind eye to Japan's role as a transit country. Why isn't Japan taking action? The reason is simple. Japan doesn't want to damage its relationship with China. In matters of economy, security, and export controls, the fear of Chinese retaliation has led Japan to turn a blind eye. And that is precisely what fuels Trump's anger the most. Fentanyl sanctions route. As long as Japan refuses to acknowledge its role as a transit country for fentanyl and fails to implement countermeasures, the likelihood of the United States imposing sanctions remains extremely high.
第一段階として、対日輸出品に 25% の関税が課される可能性は規定路線。
If Japan continues to take an ambiguous stance, additional sanctions such as further tariff increases or comprehensive export restrictions may also be expected. Trade sanctions route. Trump has long targeted Japanese automobiles and semiconductor products. Now, with the fentanyl issue as justification, he has secured a strong pretext to impose a 25% tariff. Toyota, Honda, Sony, Murata Manufacturing, Japan's core industries are highly likely to be directly impacted. Financial pressure route. In its efforts to correct the weak yen, Japan has engaged in currency intervention, something the Trump administration may denounce as currency manipulation, and respond to by increasing pressure on the Bank of Japan's monetary policy. If pressure intensifies through channels like the IMF or the G7, Japan's markets could become destabilized, and its ability to defend the yen may be severely weakened. 1.in fact, fentanyl smuggling and abuse cases have occurred in South Korea. In 2023 and 2024, suspicions emerged that fentanyl precursors from China were being routed through South Korea and exported to the United States. In recent years, South Korea has seen a rise in the abuse and black market trading of medical fentanyl patches. However, unlike Japan, where there have been zero reported seizures, South Korea has a record of intercepting fentanyl at its borders. 2. The United States views South Korea as an economic competitor and remains cautious. Especially in sectors like electric vehicles, batteries, and semiconductors, South Korea is seen as a threat to US industries. Trump has long advocated for additional tariffs on South Korean products. If suspicions related to fentanyl are added to the equation, it would provide a full justification for imposing sanctions. 3. South Korea's strategic ambiguity may backfire. Caught between China and the United States, South Korea is often seen as an even more unpredictable actor than Japan. This perception of being untrustworthy becomes a justification for imposing sanctions. Conclusion. South Korea is also recognized as a suspected transit country in the fentanyl supply chain. It is almost certain to be included among the targets of US sanctions. However, unlike Japan, South Korea has taken some measures, so the severity of the sanctions may differ. A 25% tariff remains likely. Number of detection cases: 0, over 6 years, reported by the Ministry of Finance. Several to a dozen cases detected annually. Deployment of inspection equipment: little to no progress, not even budgeted. Enhanced X-ray screening and drug-sniffing dogs deployed at airports and seaports. Government stance treats the issue as something that officially does not exist. Explicitly defines preventing drug inflows as a national policy. Explanation to the United States: no explanation of countermeasures, no diplomatic response. At the very least, they are taking some form of action. South Korea's record of seizures suggests it has a functioning system to respond to fentanyl. In contrast, Japan's zero seizures is perceived as evidence that no such system exists, turning it into a justification for sanctions. This structure effectively proves that Japan is being used as a loophole route from China. This difference in how each country confronts reality directly impacts the severity of sanctions, the level of trust, and how they are treated diplomatically. In other words, Japan is seen as obedient but irresponsible, while South Korea is viewed as difficult to handle but at least responsive. 1. Drug use and fentanyl-related arrests involving U.S. military personnel stationed in South Korea. November 2023. A U.S. service member stationed in South Korea was apprehended on suspicion of smuggling and using fentanyl, with the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office assisting in the investigation. Synthetic opioid tablets containing fentanyl were being shipped via international mail to U.S. military bases in South Korea. Both U.S. and South Korean authorities pointed out that the U.S. military mail system, APO-FPO, had become a loophole in the trafficking route. 2. Drug-related crimes committed by U.S. military personnel became a point of concern within South Korea. South Korean media have repeatedly reported that drug abuse and smuggling by U.S. military personnel are increasing year by year. The South Korean government has also expressed growing frustration over crimes committed outside U.S. bases being treated as if they fall under extraterritorial jurisdiction. Within the U.S. forces in South Korea, at least 20 drug-related violations were reported between 2021 and 2023, involving substances such as amphetamines, fentanyl, and MDMA. 3. Structural issue, APO, FPO, U.S. military postal system, and inspection loopholes. Mail addressed to U.S. military personnel can reach bases in Japan or South Korea via a special route from the United States, effectively bypassing standard customs inspections. This system allows fentanyl products sent from China, Japan, or third countries to reach U.S. military bases without inspection, making it possible for them to arrive undetected inside the bases. It is highly likely that the fentanyl reaching U.S. forces in South Korea was also sent from China. China-origin fentanyl South Korea or Japan-U.S. military bases. This route does, in fact, exist in reality. Numerous cases have been reported in which fentanyl and its precursors from China are sent to South Korea via international mail or courier services. In particular, the drugs are often disguised as tablets like oxycodone or Percocet, and there have been past cases where these were switched into mail addressed to U.S. military bases in South Korea, methods that have been exposed through investigations. In 2022, it was revealed that a portion of the drugs seized at Incheon Airport in South Korea had been sent from China, routed through South Korea, and addressed to U.S. military bases. In this case, the sender was identified as a Chinese national, and the package was addressed specifically to an individual U.S. service member stationed in South Korea, indicating a highly targeted and concrete form of trafficking. 3. Internal U.S. military reports also included the designation China origin. In a 2023 report released by the U.S. Department of Defense, it was clearly stated that the majority of fentanyl reaching U.S. military bases in the East Asia-Western Pacific region was of Chinese origin. The report specifically warned that U.S. military installations in Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines are becoming blind spots in the supply chain. This forms the diplomatic logic of the Trump administration. China produces the fentanyl. South Korea and Japan don't stop it. And American soldiers are dying. How could this not justify sanctions? Even within U.S. military bases in Japan, there are suspicions of fentanyl use and trafficking. However, very little information has been publicly disclosed. However, within the U.S. military, there have been multiple internal reports expressing concern that Japanese bases are being exploited as loopholes, posing a serious diplomatic risk. 1. Because customs operations fall under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Finance. Japan's customs services are established as an external bureau under the Ministry of Finance, serving as the central agency responsible for frontline inspections at ports and airports. The initial detection of illegal drug imports, such as methamphetamine, cannabis, and fentanyl, is the responsibility of customs, which operates under the Ministry of Finance. In other words, it is the Ministry of Finance that holds the responsibility for stopping fentanyl from entering Japan. 2. If the Ministry of Finance declares zero, other government agencies are effectively unable to act. As long as Customs reports zero detection, the Ministry of Health and the National Police Agency have no choice but to conclude that there is no domestic distribution. In other words, the Ministry of Finance's claim of zero effectively paralyzes the actions of all other agencies. 3. Why the Ministry of Finance doesn't want to get deeply involved in this issue. Fully deploying X-ray scanners, drug-sniffing dogs, and chemical detection equipment across all ports and airports in Japan would require a budget in the hundreds of billions of yen. However, the Ministry of Finance maintains a stance of fiscal consolidation and strict internal budget restraint, making it extremely reluctant to expand its own budget. If Japanese customs were to seize large quantities of China-origin fentanyl, it would directly lead to diplomatic friction between Japan and China. Since the Ministry of Finance is also responsible for the practical handling of trade agreements and negotiations, turning a blind eye is often seen as diplomatically more convenient. Japan is not simply failing to detect fentanyl. The Ministry of Finance has created a system where detection is virtually impossible. This leads to Japan being viewed not just as an uncooperative nation, but as a complicit and irresponsibly passive state. The real reason: a desire to avoid accountability. If the inspection system is strengthened, detections will occur. If detections occur, crackdowns, diplomatic negotiations, media response, and emergency budget adjustments will all be required at once. China is Japan's largest trading partner. Dependency on China, over 20% of exports and 25% of imports. If customs were to carry out a large-scale seizure of fentanyl coming through Chinese routes, it would likely trigger Chinese retaliatory measures, such as customs delays, trade sanctions, or turning the issue into a diplomatic bargaining chip. As a result, fentanyl seizures are seen as a source of unnecessary friction and are deliberately avoided. 1. The reason why even non-mainstream factions, including Ishiba, remain silent. Shigeru Ishiba, known for his sensitivity to diplomatic and defense issues, has deliberately avoided making clear statements on this matter. There is no record of him addressing it in the past. This isn't a matter of not knowing. It's a case of knowing, but being unable to speak. Because raising the issue would reveal facts unfavorable to the LDP, and within the party, that would lead to being branded a traitor. 2. It has become customary within the LDP to deal with scandals and inaction only after elections. This case fits that pattern exactly, and there is a shared understanding that any disclosure about fentanyl will come only after the election. 3. Impact on the LDP if the information were to be revealed. Zero fentanyl detections in 6 years, a symbol of negligence. Loss of information on Chinese brokers, a failure of national crisis management. Finance Ministry and police remain inactive, evidence of a corrupted bureaucratic system. If these 3 points were reported during an electio, labels such as an irresponsible government in the face of crisis, an LDP riddled with deference to China, and collusion between bureaucrats and politicians could emerge, triggering a rapid surge in defections from both opposition voters and conservative supporters. Ishiba's decision to remain among the silent is also part of an electoral strategy. If the fentanyl issue were to surface just before the election, the LDP could struggle even in the proportional representation bloc. That's why silence and postponement has become the party's most effective defense strategy. Ishiba understands this as well, and is waiting silently for the storm to pass. But during that time, Japan continues to be viewed as a pre-sanctioned country in the eyes of the international community. The structure of political silence here. Why is the Japanese government staying silent on the fentanyl issue? Why does the Ministry of Finance keep claiming 0 seizures in 6 years? And why are the police not taking action? Why is it that, even though a computer containing a list of Chinese brokers has gone missing, not even a backup has been verified? The reason is, Japan is currently in the midst of an election. If the government were to acknowledge this issue now, it would spark widespread distrust and lead to a significant drop in votes for the LDP. That's why no one dares to speak the truth. Both bureaucrats and politicians are prioritizing electoral safety over the safety of the people. Even politicians like Shigeru Ishiba, who are highly sensitive to national security, have remained silent on this issue. Because the moment they speak out, they risk being labeled a traitor within the LDP and pushed out. This is the reality of Japan today. Protecting the regime over protecting the nation. This very structure is what's deepening the fentanyl crisis even further. Who is this nation's silence really protecting? While it remains silent, the footsteps of sanctions grow ever closer. The reason no one speaks about the threat of fentanyl: elections. A nation in crisis, transformed by politics into a risk too dangerous to disclose.
This is the narrative I built together with ChatGPT. China's silent war of fentanyl, tariffs, and the true nature of the threat. While it includes perspectives that differ from current realities, it represents a vision drawn from a belief in the possibility of a new and better future. Coming next, Chapter 5, US Imports as a Diplomatic Bargaining Chip. Please stay tuned. Please don't forget to subscribe, give us a like, and feel free to leave a comment below.